Welcome back to Hidden Clue.
Tell me, where are you listening? And what do you love most about cozy mystery?
Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for a new story every day.
Let's begin.
Chapter 1. An Invitation from the Moors. The rain had come early to Carsley, drumming softly against the window panes of Agatha Raisin's cottage. It was the sort of steady, soothing rain that turned the village lanes to ribbons of silver and made even the most practical soul long for another cup of tea. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in a thick cardigan, glaring at the crossword in front of her. The clues seemed deliberately smug this morning, as if mocking her temporary retirement from detective work. Her cat, Hodge, lay sprawled across the opposite chair, one paw twitching as he dreamed. Outside, the postman's bicycle bell chimed faintly through the drizzle.
Agatha half listened, unwilling to move.
Retirement, she told herself again, was supposed to be peaceful. It was supposed to mean mornings without corpses, letters without blackmail, and afternoons spent baking things she had no real desire to eat. Then came the sound, a soft thud on the doormat. Agatha glanced toward the door. Normally, she would have ignored it until after breakfast, but something, some small, unreasonable tug, urged her to look. She sighed, pushed back her chair, and shuffled to the front hall. There, lying against the faded rug, was a single envelope unlike any she'd seen in years. It was thick, the sort of stationery one didn't see anymore, cream-coloured and sealed with deep red wax. The crest stamped into it was unfamiliar, a heron in flight above curling waves.
No return address, no postage mark.
Simply her name written in elegant, looping script. Mrs. Agatha Raisin, Carsley Cottage, Cotswolds. Her brow furrowed. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the faint impression of the seal beneath her thumb. Someone had gone to considerable trouble for a letter. At the kitchen table again, she slit the wax open with a butter knife. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper folded once. The handwriting was deliberate, careful, and oddly formal. Dear Mrs. Raisin, your reputation precedes you. Though you have withdrawn from investigative work, I write in hope that you might consider lending your professional discretion to a private concern at my family home. Plover Hall. Matters of sensitivity and perhaps danger compel my request. Please arrive at your convenience this week. You will, I trust, find our hospitality as notable as our history.
Yours faithfully, Lady Helena Plover. Agatha read the letter twice, then a third time, as the rain whispered steadily against the window.
Professional discretion, she murmured aloud. Now what in blazes does that mean? Hodge yawned in reply. The name, Plover Hall, lingered in her mind. She had heard it before years ago in some half-forgotten village tale about a house lost to fog and time. Plover Hall stood out on the moors, she remembered, a good 40 minutes' drive from Carsley. Its owners rarely ventured into the village, and when they did, people whispered afterward.
Something about bad luck.
Something about a death. Agatha folded the letter again, pressing the crease sharply. No, she told herself, rising to pour more tea.
Absolutely not. I'm done with all that. But even as she said it, she could feel the prickle of curiosity at the back of her neck.
It wasn't just the mystery, it was the invitation. The careful wording, the assumption that she'd understand what professional discretion implied. Scandal, secrecy, and perhaps, if she was honest, a touch of excitement. She stared out the window at the rain-swaddled street. Carsley looked as it always did, quiet, orderly, safe, and yet she could already sense the world tilting, ever so slightly, toward adventure. Agatha returned to the letter once more. There was no telephone number, only an address scrawled beneath the signature. She traced it with a fingertip, imagining the road curving through mist and heather. Plover Hall on the edge of the moors. A laugh escaped her.
Oh, you're a fool, Agatha Raisin, she muttered.
But at least you're a fool with decent taste in mysteries. Hodge opened one eye, unimpressed. By afternoon, the rain had eased. Agatha set the letter on her mantelpiece beside her collection of unwatered houseplants. It caught the last of the day's grey light, gleaming faintly. She tried to ignore it. She tried reading, knitting, even watching an old detective drama. But every time she looked up, the envelope was there, quietly waiting, as if daring her to decide. Finally, she sighed and reached for her phone. "Roy," she said when her friend answered, "cancel lunch tomorrow.
I've got a
small matter to look into." As she hung up, a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Outside, the sky was turning pale again, the rain slowing to a mist. Somewhere out there, beyond the tidy hedgerows and quiet lanes, lay Plover Hall, and whatever secret had just come calling. Agatha settled into her usual corner at the village cafe, the familiar scent of freshly baked scones and strong tea wrapping around her like a soft, reassuring shawl. Outside, the drizzle continued its lazy descent, casting a silvery haze over the cobbled streets. She placed the cream-colored envelope on the table and gave it a gentle tap, as if it were a small, living thing she had just rescued from the mail. Roy, already perched on the edge of his chair with a hopeful smile, leaned in. "Well, Agatha, do tell, what's this about?" His voice carried that mix of curiosity and theatrical anticipation that often made even ordinary news seem like the opening of a grand adventure. Agatha allowed herself a tiny smirk before carefully opening the letter. She read it aloud, savoring the flourish of the handwriting and the careful choice of words. "You are requested at Plover Hall for professional discretion regarding a private concern." She looked up, letting her friends absorb the meaning, though her own heart had already begun its quiet, insistent drum of excitement. Roy clapped his hands together.
Well, Plover Hall? On the moors, no less.
"I've always said there's something magical about those wind-swept hills."
Imagine the mist curling around ancient stones, Agatha.
"Perhaps even a hidden treasure, or at least an unsolved mystery." He leaned back. Daydreaming, eyes glinting, Mrs. Bloxby, forever a guardian of propriety and caution, pursed her lips, adjusting the lace cuff of her sleeve. "Magical, perhaps, but don't forget, dear, that Plover Hall has an
unfortunate history.
Tragedies, disappearances, and whispers that the place brings bad luck. I've always thought it should be avoided, especially after sunset." She tapped the table sharply with a well-manicured finger, emphasizing the weight of her words. Bill Wong, quieter than the others, stirred his tea slowly, the spoon making a soft clink against the porcelain. He didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his voice was low, deliberate.
"There was an incident.
Years ago, someone vanished from Plover Hall, never found. Not even a trace. People talk, of course, but some things are better left alone." His gaze met Agatha's briefly, a flicker of warning hidden behind polite concern. "Just don't stay the night." Agatha sipped her tea thoughtfully, letting the warmth settle through her fingers and down into her chest. She could almost hear the moors calling in the hush of her imagination, the wind whispering across barren fields, the scent of damp earth and heather rising with the drizzle. Her mind wandered to the thrill of curiosity, the pulse of a mystery waiting just beyond the ordinary. The friends continued their discussion, Roy spinning vivid scenarios of ghostly lights and hidden passages, Mrs. Bloxby punctuating with cautionary anecdotes about past misfortunes, and Bill offering occasional measured reminders of real danger. Agatha listened with growing resolve. The combination of excitement, fear, and gentle warning created a tension that was almost delicious in its pull. By the time the teapot was empty and the last crumb of scone had disappeared, Agatha had made her decision. She folded the letter neatly and tucked it into her handbag. She would go. Plover Hall awaited, with its whispered histories and fog-laden moors, and Agatha Raisin would answer the call, whether the village deemed it wise or not. The adventure, it seemed, had already begun. Chapter 2. The Road to Plover Hall. The morning she set out for Plover Hall began in a hush, so complete it felt rehearsed. Carsley still slept beneath a quilt of cloud, its chimneys breathing faint wisps into the heavy air. Agatha packed her overnight bag with brisk efficiency, though she told herself, twice, that she had no intention of staying the night. Just a visit, a chat, a look around. That was all. By the time she backed her car out of the driveway, the first fingers of mist were creeping in from the surrounding fields. It was thin at first, a gauzy veil over the hedgerows, but soon thickened until the road ahead blurred into shifting grey. Agatha switched on her headlights, leaning forward as though sheer willpower might pierce the fog more clearly. "Of all the places to build an estate," she muttered, hands tight on the wheel, "why must it be on a blasted moor?" Her wipers rasped steadily, metronomic against the quiet. Now and then the road twisted through clusters of trees whose dripping branches reached low over the lane like tired arm. Sheep stood motionless in the distance, their shapes vague and spectral. Agatha's world had shrunk to a narrow tunnel of light and sound, the purr of the engine, the squeak of the wipers, her own breath. The map on the passenger seat rustled with every bump, though the directions had been clear enough. 3 miles past Lower Chadwick, turn left at the milestone, follow the lane toward the Plover estate gates. Simple, except that the fog made each turn a guessing game. After 20 minutes, she slowed at a curve, blinking hard. For a brief second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the hedgerow. A man, tall, motionless, his coat dark against the pale mist. The shape was distinct enough that she pressed her foot to the brake. But when the car stopped and the headlights flared across the grass, the figure was gone. "Wonderful," she said aloud.
Now I'm seeing ghosts before I've even arrived. The only response came from a crow somewhere overhead, its harsh cry muffled by the mist.
It sounded almost like laughter. Agatha eased the car forward again, the tension in her shoulders refusing to ease. The moorland stretched wider now, the hedges giving way to open fields dotted with gnarled trees. The air carried a faint tang of peat and something metallic, perhaps the scent of rain lingering on old stone. She imagined Lady Helena sitting in her grand parlour, sipping tea while Agatha crept closer through this spectral landscape. A sudden gust swirled the fog into coiling shapes, and for a moment it felt as though the road itself were breathing.
Agatha shook her head sharply.
"You're getting dramatic," she told herself. "Fog doesn't breathe and mist doesn't watch." Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed. Once or twice she thought she caught movement in her rearview mirror, a flicker, a shadow keeping pace just beyond sight. But when she looked, there was nothing except the shifting veil of grey. The lane narrowed, lined with moss-covered stones. Then, as she rounded another bend, the fog began to thin. Pale light spilled through in patches, revealing the landscape at last, rolling moorland, bare and endless, the kind of view that made one feel small and temporary. And there, on the far rise, stood Plover Hall. The sight made her slow instinctively. It was larger than she had expected, an imposing stretch of grey stone rising from the moor like it had grown there. Tall chimneys jutted into the mist, and ivy clung to the weathered walls in dark skeins. The windows were high and narrow, reflecting no light. Even from a distance, the place seemed to watch her. A wrought iron gate appeared ahead, its hinges crusted with rust. She stopped the car, stepped out and pushed it open. The gate creaked, a long, reluctant groan that echoed into the mist. Beyond it, a gravel drive curved toward the house through skeletal trees. Agatha took a deep breath and returned to the car. The engine's hum felt oddly reassuring as she drove the final stretch. A flock of crows burst from a tree as she approached, scattering in a whirl of black wings and sound. The noise startled her enough that she laughed nervously, shaking her head. When she pulled up before the great oak doors, the mist closed behind her like a curtain, swallowing the road she'd come by. For a moment, she sat in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the engine and the soft hiss of wind against stone. "Well," she murmured, glancing up at the looming facade, "it's certainly not short on atmosphere." The door opened before she could reach for the bell. A woman in a dark uniform stood there, stiff posture, unreadable expression. "Mrs. Raisin," the woman said, her voice quiet but clear. "Lady Plover is expecting you." Agatha gathered her handbag, squared her shoulders, and stepped out of the car. The mist swirled around her ankles like a living thing as she followed the woman inside, leaving the grey moor and its secrets waiting beyond the gates. The entrance hall of Plover Hall was colder than the weather outside. Agatha felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, a hush that clung to the air like cobwebs. Her heels clicked sharply on the black and white tiled floor, the sound echoing up into the shadowed rafters. A portrait-lined staircase curved upward ahead, the painted eyes of long-dead plovers watching her progress, with the kind of solemn disapproval reserved for outsiders. The housekeeper, the same stiff woman who had greeted her, led the way through a wide corridor lined with oil paintings and gilt mirrors. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and old paper. Every step seemed to amplify the silence. "Lady Helena will see you in the morning room," the housekeeper said at last, opening a heavy oak door. "She doesn't much like the West Wing these days." Agatha arched a brow.
"Oh, and why's that?"
The woman hesitated just long enough for Agatha to notice, then replied, "It's damp," before slipping away without another word. The morning room was grand but strangely forlorn. The curtains were drawn halfway, muting the grey light that filtered through the tall windows. A tea service gleamed on a silver tray untouched. By the fireplace stood a woman dressed in deep plum velvet, her posture graceful but tense. She turned as Agatha entered, revealing a face both beautiful and brittle, like fine china left too close to the fire. "Mrs. Raisin," she said warmly, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. "How very good of you to come. Lady Helena Plover, I presume?" Agatha shook her hand. "I must admit your letter intrigued me."
"It's not every day I'm invited to a moor-top mansion by post." Helena smiled faintly, but her eyes, pale grey, sharp and weary, did not soften.
"It's been a rather strange season here."
"I wasn't sure whom to trust."
"But your reputation for discretion preceded you." "Discretion?" Agatha repeated with a wry twist of her lips. "That's one word for it." They sat by the fire, though the flames burned low and feeble. Helena poured tea herself, her hands steady despite the tension that hovered in the room. From somewhere beyond the door came the faint shuffle of footsteps, then silence. "I should begin at the start," Helena said. "My husband Charles passed away 3 years ago. Since then the house has been, well, not quite itself. The staff complain of noises at night. Doors opening, objects moved from their proper places. I thought little of it at first."
"Old houses make sounds," Agatha nodded, half listening, her gaze drifting toward the window.
Beyond the glass, the moor stretched grey and endless.
"And lately?"
Helena's voice lowered.
"Lately it's been worse. Last week, something went missing. An heirloom, my husband's pendant."
The Plover pendant. It's been in his family for generations. Gold filigree set with a small sapphire. "I kept it locked in the study. The key was with me." Agatha leaned forward. "And you think someone in the house took it?" Helena hesitated. "I don't know. The locks weren't forced, and no one admits to entering the room."
"I had begun to think—" She stopped, looking away, embarrassed. "Go on." "That it might not be a person," she whispered.
Charles was very attached to that pendant. He always said it would stay here as long as the family did. The night it disappeared, I heard him.
"Or someone calling my name." Agatha hid her reaction behind a sip of tea.
She wasn't one for ghost stories, though she'd learned never to dismiss them outright, not in villages like this, where superstition settled as deep as the fog.
"Perhaps a draught," she said lightly.
"Or an overworked imagination?" Helena gave a brittle laugh. "Perhaps, but the staff are uneasy. They've begun avoiding the West Wing altogether. Some swear they've seen a light in the study after dark." As if on cue, the door creaked open. A young maid stood there, pale-faced and uncertain. "Beg pardon, my lady. Cook says luncheon is ready." "Thank you, Iris," Helena said softly. The girl nodded and slipped away, closing the door with a trembling hand. Agatha watched her go. "The staff seem—"
"Nervous. They've been with me for years," Helena replied.
"But lately they've changed."
"I can't tell if it's fear or guilt." The fire gave a sudden pop, sending a small shower of sparks into the grate.
Helena flinched, her teacup rattling on the saucer. Agatha set down her own cup and rose. "Well, Lady Plover, whether it's thieves or phantoms, I'll find out which is making mischief in your halls." Helena looked up at her, hope flickering behind the caution in her eyes. "You believe me, then?"
Agatha smiled faintly. "I believe something's going on."
And I do hate unsolved mysteries. Outside, the wind rose against the windows, a hollow moan winding through the chimneys. Somewhere deep within Plover Hall, a door shut by itself. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Hall. Agatha had never liked sleeping in strange houses. There was always some little noise that kept her awake, a ticking clock, a creaking pipe, or, in this case, the persistent sigh of the wind as it pushed against the windows of Plover Hall. Her guest room overlooked the courtyard, and through the warped panes she could see the faint shimmer of mist rising from the stones below. The hallways had gone quiet hours ago. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock chimed 12. She turned over beneath the heavy quilt and muttered, "For heaven's sake, Raisin, you're not 16 at a sleepover. It's just an old house." Then she heard it, a sound so soft at first that she thought it was the wind again, but no. The wind was steady, this was not. This was slower, deliberate, a measured thud, thud, thud. Footsteps, pacing back and forth directly above her room. Agatha sat up. Her pulse ticked a little faster, though she would never admit it. The ceiling overhead was low, slanted where the roof dipped. That room, if there was one, should have been the attic. But Lady Helena had insisted earlier that the attic was sealed. Another step.
Then another.
Then silence. Agatha slipped out of bed, pulling on her dressing gown. The carpet was cold underfoot as she opened her door into the corridor. The gaslight sconces had been dimmed to a sleepy amber glow, casting the hallway in long shadows. The portrait seemed to lean forward in the half-light, as though curious to see what she would do next. She padded down the corridor toward the staircase, trying to pinpoint the direction of the noise. Every few seconds she paused, listening. Nothing. Then a faint creak above, further down. She found the narrow servants' stair that wound upward toward the attic level. The door at the bottom was old and slightly warped. When she pressed the latch, it protested with a groan. She flinched at the sound, then frowned at herself.
"Get a grip, Agatha," she whispered.
"You face-down murderers. A few floorboards won't do you in?" The stairwell was unlit, but she had brought along the small brass candle holder from her bedside table. She struck a match and lit it, shielding the flame from the draught. As she climbed, her eyes caught something glinting on the step. A small,
round drop of hardened wax. She crouched, touching it with her fingertip. Fresh, still faintly warm. "Well, that's not the handiwork of ghosts," she murmured.
"Someone's been up here with a candle." At the top of the stairs, she reached a wooden door that looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. Dust lay thick along the frame, yet faint fingerprints disturbed it. She pushed gently. The latch held firm at first, then gave way with a click that echoed up into the rafters. Beyond lay a short landing, boarded windows leaking in thin stripes of moonlight. The air was colder here, touched with that peculiar stillness of spaces forgotten by time.
Agatha lifted her candle higher. A single muddy footprint marred the floorboards, half smeared as though the person had hesitated mid-step before turning back.
It pointed toward the west wing, the very section Helena had avoided. Agatha crouched to study it. The footprint was small, narrower than a man's shoe, the heels slightly worn on one side.
"A woman," she muttered, "or a very tidy gardener." She followed the trail, only to find that it ended abruptly where the boards met the west wing's heavy oak door.
The keyhole was stuffed with wax, a crude attempt at sealing it from the inside. A faint gust whispered through the gap beneath the door, carrying with it the faint scent of candle smoke. Someone had been here, recently. Agatha stood very still, listening. Somewhere beyond that door, faint and distant, she thought she heard the soft drag of fabric against wood. A sigh.
Then nothing. She stepped back, pulse quickening, and whispered to herself, "If that's a ghost, it's remarkably tidy."
If it's a person, they've got explaining to do. Carefully, she snuffed her candle and began her descent, noting each creak of the steps as though committing the sound to memory. When she reached her room again, she locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Her reflection in the mirror looked half amused, half troubled. "Well, Raisin," she muttered, "you've come to Plover Hall for a quiet investigation."
Instead, you're living in a Gothic novel. Outside, the courtyard mist had thickened, curling like breath against the window.
Somewhere high above, a loose shutter banged once, twice, then stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that it almost hummed. Agatha blew out her candle and climbed back into bed, keeping one eye open toward the ceiling until the first blush of dawn crept over the moor. Morning arrived at Plover Hall with a hush, as though even the sunlight was wary of disturbing its long corridors. Agatha, fortified by 2 cups of coffee and a rather dry slice of toast, decided that the best cure for a restless night was work. She dressed briskly, tying a scarf at her neck, and marching downstairs with the air of a woman intent on answers. The library was exactly where she expected it to be, east wing, past the grand staircase and a pair of oak doors carved with hunting scenes. When she entered, she stopped short. It was magnificent. Rows upon rows of leather-bound books stretched from floor to ceiling, their spines worn to shades of brown and burgundy. Dust motes drifted lazily in the slanted light from tall windows. The scent of paper, wood polish, and faint pipe smoke lingered like an old memory. At the far end, above a carved marble fireplace, hung a portrait. A man, broad-shouldered, severe, eyes the grey-blue of storm clouds. Lord Charles Plover. His painted gaze seemed to catch her from every angle, and though Agatha told herself she was too sensible to be unsettled by brushstrokes, she found herself glancing back more than once. "Well?"
"Lord Plover," she said aloud, "if you've got secrets, now's the time to tell them." Her voice sounded small in the cavernous room.
She began her inspection with a large desk positioned before the window. The oak surface gleamed under years of wax polish, but a fine layer of dust had settled in its crevices, except for one corner, recently disturbed. Agatha ran a finger along it, then tugged open the top drawer. Inside were ledgers, letters, and old estate papers, all arranged with a meticulous care. Nothing odd at first glance. But when she slid out the middle drawer, something caught, a tiny resistance at the back. She frowned, probing gently until her nail brushed a metal edge. "Ah," she murmured, "you've a secret, haven't you?" She pressed the edge, and with a soft click, a small hidden compartment popped open beneath the drawer. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The paper had yellowed, the ink browned at the edges. She untied the ribbon carefully and read the first page. "My dearest, see, it is no use pretending. If Charles learns of us, he will have me sent away. I cannot bear another winter alone at the Hall, hearing him speak her name as though she still lives within these walls."
Agatha's brows shot up.
"Well, well."
"A love triangle, perhaps?"
She skimmed another. The handwriting was delicate, emotional, almost frantic by the final letter. "Dearest Catherine, you must not write again. For your own sake, leave the moor. He suspects." The name leapt from the page. Catherine. Agatha read the signature, an elegant swirl of H, and felt a chill tickle the back of her neck. She replaced the letters carefully and closed the drawer. At that moment, the door creaked behind her. She turned to find Lady Helena standing there, pale and composed, though her eyes fixed instantly on the desk. "You're up early," Agatha said lightly.
"I was just admiring your husband's taste in decor and discovering his desk has
personality." Helena stepped closer, her gaze flicking toward the drawer. "You found something?" "Just a few old letters." Agatha studied her reaction. "One name in particular caught my eye, Catherine." The teacup Helena carried rattled softly against its saucer. "You read them?" "Only enough to see that someone was very unhappy here." Helena turned toward the portrait, her face tight. "Catherine was Charles's first wife. She died here, long before I came to Plover Hall." Agatha blinked.
"I didn't realize he'd been married twice." "It's not something we speak of," Helena said quietly. "She was delicate."
"They said she took ill."
"Others said." She stopped, swallowing hard. It was a tragic business, best left to rest. Funny, Agatha said, glancing at the portrait, because her name doesn't seem to rest at all.
Someone kept those letters. Someone wanted them found. Helena's composure faltered. I had no idea they existed. Perhaps not, Agatha said gently, but it seems someone in this house remembers Catherine very well. And if the pendant went missing just as these came to light, I'd say the past is rattling its chains again. Helena turned toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Do you believe in hauntings, Mrs. Raisin?
Agatha followed her gaze.
Beyond the misted glass, the moor stretched endless and grey, a place where stories clung to the soil. I believe the dead can't rest when the living won't let them, she said softly. And sometimes secrets make more noise than ghosts ever could. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire in the grate gave a small hiss, and the painted eyes of Lord Plover seemed to gleam just a little brighter, as though he, too, had heard the name Catherine and remembered. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The fog had rolled in thick again by mid-morning, softening the world into shades of pearl and grey. Agatha, armed with her notebook and a strong sense of purpose, crossed the courtyard toward the gardens. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and moss. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, a lonely, echoing sound that seemed to belong to the moor itself. She found Mr. Hobbs by the potting shed, hunched over a row of terracotta pots. His cap was pulled low, his hands caked with soil. He looked up as she approached, one eye narrowing against the glare. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," he said, his voice gravelly from years of weather and smoke. "You're out early." "I thought I'd stretch my legs before breakfast," Agatha replied, offering her brightest smile. "Lovely place for a walk, though I can't see 10 feet ahead." He gave a short laugh, more breath than mirth.
"Aye, that's how it likes to be."
"The mist hides things." Agatha leaned casually against the fence. "You've been here a long while, haven't you, Mr. Hobbs?" 40 years come spring," he said, pressing a seed into a pot with his thumb. "I've seen this place change hands, watched the gardens grow wild and back again." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then you must remember Lord Charles's first wife, Catherine." The man froze. Just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. His hand trembled slightly before he reached for his trowel. "Not a name I hear much these days," he said slowly. "She's been mentioned recently," Agatha said.
"Some say she died here."
He hesitated, then sighed.
"That's what that poor thing."
"Found her down by the lake years back. Or rather, never found her. They said she drowned, but no one saw her go in." Agatha's gaze followed his, toward the distant shimmer of water, barely visible through the fog. "And what do you say?" Mr. Hobbs's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "I say she still walks. When the mist comes thick like this, I've seen a figure, white dress, long hair, moving along the edge of the lake. Never close enough to call out. Just drifting." Agatha arched a brow. "You believe it's her ghost?" He gave a small, tired shrug. "Belief's got nothing to do with it, ma'am."
"I've seen her."
"And I'll tell you something else. Whatever's been happening in that house lately, it started again after the mist came back last week." "Same as before." "Before what?" He looked up sharply, eyes wary. "Before the pendant went missing. Before the voices started." Agatha noticed his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his trousers. This wasn't superstition, it was fear. "Deep, lived-in fear, Mr. Hobbs," she said gently. "Why do I get the feeling you know more than you're saying?" He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Because I've stayed here too long, Mrs. Raisin. Long enough to know the dead don't always lie quiet, and neither do the living." A gust of wind rippled through the garden, setting the branches whispering like voices too soft to understand. When Agatha turned to glance toward the lake, the fog had thickened, hiding everything beyond a few yards. When she looked back, Mr. Hobbs had already gone inside the shed, the door closing behind him with a muted thud. Dinner at Plover Hall had the stiff, uneasy charm of a play where none of the actors trusted one another. The dining room, though grand, felt too large for the small company gathered around the long oak table. Silver candlesticks gleamed between crystal glasses, their flames trembling slightly in the draught that slipped beneath the heavy curtains. Agatha took her seat midway down, opposite Lady Helena, who presided at the head of the table with her usual grace, though tonight that grace seemed frayed. Her smile was practiced, her eyes shadowed by fatigue. To her right sat Mr. Penrose, the estate manager, a narrow man with thinning hair and the air of one perpetually calculating expenses. Beside him, young Iris, the maid, fidgeted with her napkin, clearly uncomfortable being included in so formal a gathering. At the far end lounged a man Agatha hadn't met before, introduced as Geoffrey Langdon, Helena's distant cousin. His charm was immediate but thin, the kind that hides boredom rather than good nature. Conversation began politely enough. The soup was hot, the wine generous, and Agatha, ever observant, let the flow of small talk wash over her as she watched the others. Penrose spoke of the failing East Gardens. Helena listened with distracted politeness, and Geoffrey teased Iris gently, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Agatha noticed how the girl's hand shook slightly when she poured the wine. Penrose's gaze flicked toward her with faint irritation, then toward Helena, as though measuring her reaction. Helena avoided both their eyes. Something unspoken passed around the table, quick, invisible, but heavy. "So," Agatha said, cheerfully, breaking the tension, "I took a stroll round the grounds this morning. Quite beautiful, though I nearly lost my way in the fog." "Does it always roll in so thick?" Mr. Penrose cleared his throat. "The moor's temperamental, Mrs. Raisin. You get used to it, or you stay indoors." "Wise advice," Geoffrey said lazily.
"Though I've always thought the mist suits this place, gives it atmosphere." "Atmosphere," Helena echoed faintly, setting down her glass.
"Yes, it does that." Agatha caught the faintest twitch of her mouth, a tremor between amusement and dread. She decided to prod a little further. "Mr. Hobbs tells me the mists when the ghosts come walking." Helena's knife paused over her lamb. "Hobbs talks too much," Geoffrey chuckled.
"Oh, let the man have his stories, cousin."
"Every old estate needs one ghost at least."
"I say it keeps the tourists away." Penrose gave him a hard look.
"We're not a tourist site, Mr. Langdon." "No, you're not," Agatha said mildly. "But perhaps ghosts aren't the worst kind of company."
"At least they don't gossip at dinner." Helena smiled faintly, grateful for the levity.
But before she could reply, the nearest candle sputtered. A thread of smoke coiled upward. The flame guttered, then went out. The rest flickered violently in sympathy. Helena stiffened. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. Agatha inhaled. Beneath the scent of roast meat and wine, another note lingered, sweet, pungent, unmistakable. Cigar smoke. Helena's hand flew to her throat.
"Charles," she murmured. The room went utterly still.
Even Geoffrey's smirk faltered. Iris looked on the verge of tears. Agatha, ever pragmatic, rose from her chair. "Now then," she said briskly, "let's not jump to hauntings before we've checked the obvious." She crossed to the window and drew back the curtain. A crack at the sash let in a draught and, faintly, the sound of wind. "There's your culprit." "Wind down the chimney, likely lit something smouldering in the hearth." Helena managed a shaky laugh. Of course, that must be it." But Agatha's eyes lingered on the mantel. The fire was nothing but grey ash, cold and neat. No ember could have lit cigar smoke now. She turned back to her seat, masking her unease with a sip of wine. Geoffrey was watching her closely, his expression unreadable. Iris's hands trembled as she reached to relight the candle, and for an instant Agatha caught a look between her and Penrose, a quick, nervous glance that seemed to say, "Don't." When the light returned, the mood did not. Conversation limped along, hollow and polite, until Helena rose and declared the meal finished. As the guests drifted out, Agatha lingered by the extinguished candle. A faint ring of soot marred the tablecloth beneath it,
as though something oily had burned there for a moment before vanishing. "Well," she muttered under her breath, "if that was a ghost, it's got a taste for drama." She turned toward the doorway just in time to see Geoffrey whisper something to Penrose, too low to hear,
but enough to send the manager's face pale. The fog pressed against the windows again, and somewhere in the hall above a board creaked. The shadows in Plover Hall lengthened, and Agatha Raisin, ever more certain that this haunting had nothing to do with spirits, followed the others out into the dim corridor. Chapter 5. The Lake and the Locket. Morning mist clung to the lake like a veil, softening its edges and swallowing the far bank from view.
Agatha stood at the water's edge, hands tucked into her coat pockets, her breath fogging in the chill air.
Even at mid-morning, the surface remained perfectly still. Too still, she thought, for a place with so many whispered tragedies. The reeds rustled faintly as she crouched near the shallows. The ground squelched beneath her sensible shoes, and the faint scent of algae mixed with the cold. Metallic tang of earth. Mr. Hobbs's words echoed in her mind. She walks when the fog rolls in. Catherine Plover, sister-in-law. Drowned decades ago, or so the story went. Walks, Agatha muttered dryly. Or rows, or perhaps swims. She smiled faintly at her own joke, but it faded as something glinted between the reeds. She reached out and tugged gently at the object buried in silt. A small locket, tarnished and heavy with mud, came free.
Agatha rubbed it clean with her handkerchief.
Beneath the grime, a single letter gleamed faintly. "See, well now," she murmured. "You've waited a long time, haven't you?" The clasp was rusted shut, but she slipped it into her coat pocket all the same. The air had grown heavier, the mist pressing closer as if to hide her discovery. From somewhere across the lake came the croak of a lone heron, startling in the silence. Agatha rose, brushing off her knees. "If you did drown here, Catherine, someone wanted to make sure you stayed put." She turned toward the house. Through the thinning fog, Plover Hall loomed like a faded painting, its windows dark, its reflection rippling faintly on the lake's edge. That night, sleep came late. The house felt different after dark, every corridor filled with the quiet sighs of age. Agatha sat up in bed, the locket turning between her fingers. When she heard voices drifting through the half-open window, they came from the courtyard below. Two figures, shadows moving against the moonlight.
"Told you she shouldn't have come back," a man's voice hissed. "She's asking questions. What was I supposed to do, ignore her? You should have warned me." "If she finds out..." A sudden clatter silenced them both.
A bucket, perhaps, kicked against stone. The voices faded into whispers, and then were gone. Agatha leaned out the window, but the mist had crept back, swallowing everything but the faint glow from the stables. She could just make out someone hurrying inside, a slim figure, perhaps the maid, Iris. She sat back, heart steady but mind racing. She shouldn't have come back. The words weren't about her, she felt sure of that. They were about Catherine. The locket lay warm in her palm now,
as if it carried a heartbeat of its own, somewhere in this house.
Someone knew what really happened by the lake, and that someone was already afraid she'd found the first clue. Agatha found Lady Helena in the morning room, seated by the fire though the sun had already risen. The widow looked smaller somehow, her shoulders rounded, as if the weight of the hall pressed upon her. On the table before her lay a small stack of letters, envelopes yellowed and curling at the edges. "They arrived again last night," Helena said quietly, glancing up as Agatha entered.
"Unsigned."
"No mark, no clue." "But the handwriting..." She shook her head. "It's Catherine's." Agatha leaned over the table, eyes narrowing. Each letter was written in the same delicate, looping script she had seen in the library's hidden drawer. The loops of the C and the curl of the T were unmistakable.
"Identical," she murmured.
"This isn't coincidence." Helena's hand hovered over the top envelope, trembling slightly before she opened it. Inside was a single sheet, pale and worn. The ink had faded almost to brown, but the words remained sharp. "The truth lies below." Agatha read aloud softly.
"Below? That's vague. Literally below?
Or metaphorical? Helena's lips pressed into a thin line. But it's the same warning each time. Sometimes it's scrawled across the envelope, sometimes inside, sometimes both. She pushed the letters toward Agatha. "I keep them hidden from the staff."
"They'd think me mad."
"I try to ignore them, but I cannot. I feel watched." Agatha examined the paper carefully, turning it in her hands. "It's meant to alarm," she said, tone steady. "Someone wants you or anyone reading to believe Catherine is still here." She held up the locket she had found earlier. "And someone is staging these hauntings very deliberately. Look at this handwriting. It's too perfect, too deliberate. Whoever is doing this knows your history intimately." Helena nodded slowly. "Yes, but why? What do they hope to gain?" Her voice was barely a whisper, almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. The pendant, perhaps? Or something else hidden in this house? Something Catherine had a claim to? Agatha's mind raced. The letters in the library had spoken of Catherine and Charles, tensions over inheritance, secrets long buried. The handwriting now mirrored those old documents perfectly. "This isn't a ghost, Lady Helena," she said firmly. "It's a human with a plan. Someone wants the past to seem alive so the present can be controlled." Helena shivered. "I never imagined anyone would use Catherine against me." Agatha placed the locket gently beside the letters. "They may not care about you. They care about the hall, the pendant, the secrets Catherine held. The phrase, the truth lies below. It could mean the cellar, the lake, even a hidden compartment in the house. Or it could be metaphorical, the truth buried in lies, in who you trust." Helena pressed her fingers to her temple, her eyes distant. "I feel like the house itself conspires with them." "Then we must be smarter," Agatha said, settling into the chair opposite her. "We treat this like a puzzle. Every letter, every candle that flickers, every step in the night, all clues. And whoever is behind this," she added with a sly smile, "is counting on you being afraid." "That won't happen," the fire crackled between them. Outside, the fog rolled lazily across the moor, blurring the line between water, earth, and sky. Agatha stared at the letters once more. "Below," she whispered to herself. "Let's see what's waiting beneath the surface." Chapter 6. The Hall in the Storm. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened over Plover Hall as if the moor itself had drawn a shroud. Thick clouds churned above the roof, and the wind tugged at the shutters with increasing urgency. Agatha had been reading in the morning room when the first rumbles of thunder reached the hall, rolling like distant cannon fire across the moor. She was mid-page when a sudden flash of lightning seared through the tall windows, illuminating the portraits along the corridor walls in stark, frozen clarity. The next instant, darkness fell with a snap. The electricity gone, the hall plunged into a black so complete it felt almost solid. Agatha paused, hand hovering over the arm of her chair. Even the fire which had burned low and dying was now a shadow of warmth. The house creaked, a long, groaning protest that made every picture frame and door frame seem alive. Then she heard it, a scream, high, piercing, raw with terror, cutting through the sound of the storm. It was human, unmistakably human, and it came from somewhere in the east wing. Agatha's heart leapt. She grabbed a candlestick from the side table, striking a match. The weak flame flickered in her hand, but it was enough to illuminate the hallway as she raced toward the sound. The corridors were labyrinthine, and the storm's fury rattled the windows. Every step she took echoed ominously, shadows shifting and dancing along the walls. Lightning flashed again, and for a brief second she glimpsed what looked like a figure darting behind a doorway. She paused, breath sharp, listening. Silence. Then another rumble of thunder, followed by the faint patter of rain leaking through the roof in the distance. The scream came again, shorter this time, more terrified. Agatha's instincts propelled her. She reached Helena's room, finding the door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she saw the widow standing in the middle of the room, her face pale, shoulders trembling. What is it?" Agatha asked, moving quickly to her side. Helena's eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on the broken mirror above the dressing table. The glass was fractured diagonally, jagged edges catching the erratic candlelight, reflecting slivers of the storm-darkened room. I saw her." Helena gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the mirror. "Catherine! She was there just for a moment, her face looking at me." Agatha took a cautious step closer, studying the shard. In the fragmented reflections, she could see the storm outside, lightning flashes throwing fleeting shapes across the walls, but no woman. Only Helena, her reflection multiplied in jagged pieces. "Lady Helena," Agatha said gently, resting a hand on the widow's arm. "Look at me."
"You were frightened by the lightning and the mirror."
She gestured toward the shattered glass. "It makes illusions. You saw your own reflection, or perhaps one of the portraits behind you."
"Catherine isn't here." Helena's lips trembled as she swallowed. I know, but it felt real, so real. I could smell the smoke, hear her footsteps. I couldn't move. Agatha's mind raced.
The scream, the mirror, the storm. It was all too convenient. Yet the fear in Helena's eyes was genuine. She tucked the candlestick under her arm. "We'll figure it out," she said, voice calm but firm. "Someone wants to frighten you, and they're clever. But fear doesn't solve mysteries, it hides them. Come, let's secure this room. And then we find out who's playing games with shadows." Outside, the wind shrieked against the stone walls, carrying rain in horizontal sheets. A final flash of lightning struck a tree near the courtyard, illuminating the hall for an instant in blinding white, and for that single heartbeat.
Agatha caught the glimmer of a shadow moving along the corridor, slender,
Purposeful, human. She swallowed, gripping the candlestick tighter. The storm wasn't over, and neither, she realized, was the game at Plover Hall. The storm had passed by the time Agatha made her way to the attic, though the damp chill lingered in the corridors. She carried a sturdy flashlight and the determination of a woman who had spent years unraveling other people's secrets. The door at the top of the servants' stair still bore the stubborn wax seal from before, but Agatha had come prepared. With a firm push, the door creaked, groaned, and finally gave way, revealing the space beyond. The attic was a cathedral of dust and shadows. Moonlight filtered through a small circular window, illuminating motes that danced like tiny spirits. Rows of old trunks lined the walls, their leather cracked and handles tarnished. Faded dresses hung from hooks along the far side, their fabrics stiff with age. A forgotten tapestry drooped from the rafters, curling into itself like a secret waiting to be told. Agatha set her flashlight down on a trunk and began to examine the space carefully. Each chest, she realized, was labeled with dates, names, and a meticulous hand that suggested care, except one trunk, smaller, plain, unlabeled. She pried it open. Inside were letters, personal effects, and, most strikingly, a journal, its cover brittle but legible. She traced her fingers over the name embossed faintly in gold on the cover, Catherine P. The journal smelled of old paper, dampness, and something faintly metallic.
Agatha flipped it open, skimming the entry.
At first, they were everyday musings, descriptions of the gardens, her dislike for certain house staff, minor quarrels over the estate. Then the tone shifted. "He says he wants to protect the family."
"But I see him hiding things."
"Things that belong to me."
"I cannot trust him, though he swears he loves me. I fear what he will do next." Agatha's pulse quickened.
She turned to the final entry. "He said he'd hide everything beneath the lake."
I cannot.
The words ended abruptly, ink smudged by tears or haste. The unfinished sentence trembled on the page like a voice cut off mid-sentence.
Agatha's mind raced. Catherine hadn't simply vanished.
Someone had intended to erase her entirely, along with her possessions. A sudden draught made the old boards groan, and Agatha glanced around. The attic felt smaller now, more oppressive, as if it remembered the secrets it had held for decades. Faded dresses seemed to sway, and the trunks themselves seemed to press closer. Her eyes returned to the journal. Whoever had orchestrated the hauntings, the letters, the missing pendant, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the hall, someone willing to use fear as a weapon. Human hands, not spirits, were behind this. Agatha closed the journal carefully, placing it atop the plain trunk. The final clue in the attic had confirmed her growing suspicion. The ghost was a ruse, a mask for something darker. The lake was not merely a backdrop for tragedy. It was central to a plan that had remained hidden for decades. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. The path forward was now clearer. Follow the breadcrumbs Catherine had left. Confront whoever had rewritten history with shadows and smoke.
And unearth the truth hidden beneath the lake. Agatha turned to descend.
The attic, once again quiet but heavy with secrets waiting for the living to uncover. Chapter 7. Truth Beneath the Lake. The storm had passed, leaving the moor damp and glistening under a pale moon. Mist clung to the lake's surface like a soft veil, swirling in the gentle night breeze. Agatha, dressed in her thick coat, crouched beside the reeds, Bill Wong at her side, lantern in hand. The air smelled of wet earth and rain-soaked leaves, sharp and clean. "This feels like a scene from a Gothic novel," Bill muttered, kneeling in the mud. "Except in a novel I'd be dead by now." "Cheerful as always," Agatha replied, but her tone was quiet, serious. They had returned under cover of darkness, determined to see for themselves what the fog and the haunted stories had concealed. She traced her fingers along the shoreline, noting a raised patch of mud. It was subtle, just a small ridge, barely noticeable unless one knew to look. She pointed.
"Here, something's been moved." Bill crouched beside her.
Together they began to dig carefully, using small trowels from the toolkit she had brought along. Each shovelful of mud revealed dark, soaked earth beneath. The night was silent except for the occasional rustle of reeds and distant drip of water from the trees. Lightning from earlier had left occasional glints in the water, casting silver reflections across the mist. Minutes passed, and their hands were cold and wet. Then, beneath a tangle of roots, Agatha's trowel struck something solid.
"Bill," she whispered, voice sharp with anticipation. "Here! Something's here." They cleared the remaining mud, revealing the edge of an old wooden chest, its iron bands rusted and corroded. Agatha's heart thumped audibly, the lantern light making the chest gleam like a relic buried in time.
Together they pried the lid open. The smell of damp decay wafted up, and Agatha swallowed hard. Inside lay a bundle of skeletal remains, partially wrapped in rotted fabric. Among the bones glinted a small object, silver, intricate, unmistakable. She lifted it carefully, the plover pendant still intact. Bill drew in a sharp breath.
"Catherine,"
he whispered. Agatha knelt, eyes fixed on the remains, her hand trembling slightly. "She's been here all along." The pendant, everything was hidden to cover this. She looked up at the lake, the mist curling like ghosts around the surface. A haunting was never about spirits. Someone staged it to keep the truth under wraps. The weight of the revelation pressed on them both. The moor was silent, except for the gentle lap of water against the bank. Agatha brushed a strand of damp hair from her face, staring down at Catherine's resting place. She was betrayed, hidden away, and forgotten. "But we found her. That counts for something." Bill nodded, lighting a cigarette carefully despite the wetness of his coat. "Someone thought fear would protect their secret. They underestimated us." Agatha closed the chest gently, covering it with the earth and reeds once more. "We need to tell Helena," she said softly. "But first—"
"Let her rest."
"She's suffered long enough." They stood in silence, the lantern casting warm golden light across the reeds, the lake shimmering faintly behind them. The mist curled, but it no longer held menace. Only the quiet weight of truth finally revealed. Agatha felt a peculiar mixture of shock and relief, sorrow and satisfaction. The mystery had been solved, the deception exposed, and yet the moor whispered still, reminding her that some stories never truly rest. The drawing room was quiet, the fire casting warm, flickering light across the polished wood and velvet curtains. Agatha stood by the mantel, the plover pendant carefully held in her hand. Helena sat in her chair, composed but tense, while Geoffrey Langdon lounged in the far armchair, his usual smirk absent, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped unease. "Lady Helena," Agatha began,
voice steady, "we've discovered Catherine."
"The lake, the chest, it's all accounted for. The pendant, too. It seems someone thought fear would protect a secret." Helena's hands clenched in her lap, fingers twisting nervously.
"Yes," she said softly, "fear can hide much."
"But not everything." Her eyes flicked toward Geoffrey. Not everything escapes notice. Agatha's gaze sharpened. And perhaps it's time we speak frankly. Geoffrey, you were in a position to benefit from Catherine's disappearance, were you not? Geoffrey's lips pressed together, a muscle twitching in his jaw. For a long moment silence filled the room, broken only by the low crackle of the fire. Then he exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "Yes," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper.
I killed her years ago.
It was for the inheritance. I didn't plan it carefully. I was young, greedy, foolish. She threatened to reveal everything to my uncle.
I panicked. Helena's hands went to her face, hiding her eyes. All these years,
she murmured. The fear, the whispers, the letters.
I had to act. I couldn't accuse him outright, not without proof, so
I let the haunting speak for me. Agatha's tone was calm, measured, the anchor in the storm of revelations. You created a ruse of the supernatural, Helena, to draw the truth out. It was clever and frightening, but ultimately effective. The evidence we found at the lake corroborates Catherine's story. Geoffrey's eyes filled with something like shame, guilt heavy upon his shoulders.
I never thought anyone would find out. Not after all this time. I
deserve whatever comes. Helena's voice, though quivering, held quiet dignity. Justice does not always require revenge. It requires truth. I hoped that by showing the hall its own shadows, the right conclusion would be drawn. Agatha nodded, placing the pendant on the mantel. And now it has. Catherine rests, Geoffrey has confessed, and the hall can breathe again. Sometimes fear teaches lessons, sometimes it hides them. But tonight it has led to clarity. Geoffrey hung his head, while Helena exhaled slowly, as though releasing decades of tension.
Agatha looked at them both and allowed herself a faint smile.
The kind that comes after a long night solved, after wrongs are acknowledged and the truth reclaimed. The fire crackled between them, its warmth filling the room with calm. Outside, the moor lay quiet beneath the silver light of the moon. No mist, no shadows, only the lingering echo of secrets revealed and justice quietly restored. Chapter 8. Morning over Plover Hall. The first light of dawn spilled across the moors in gentle washes of gold and rose, chasing away the last tendrils of mist. Plover Hall, once shrouded in shadow and uncertainty, seemed to breathe under the pale sunlight, its stone walls warm and solid instead of foreboding. Agatha stood on the terrace, coat wrapped tightly around her, watching the dew sparkle on the hedges and lawns. The sound of soft footsteps on gravel drew her attention. Police officers moved methodically, gathering the remnants of the night's revelations, the broken mirror, the hidden letters, and the traces of disturbed earth by the lake. They worked with quiet efficiency, respectful of the gravity of what had been uncovered, and Agatha noted the careful balance between duty and reverence. Helena appeared at the top of the terrace stairs, the morning light highlighting her features, softened by relief and lingering tension. She carried the plover pendant in her hand, fingers tracing its silver surface as if measuring the weight of history it now symbolized. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, her voice calm but threaded with gratitude, "I cannot thank you enough for everything." Agatha inclined her head, smiling faintly. "Oh, you did most of the work yourself, Lady Helena. You had the courage to face the truth, even when it meant creating shadows to protect it."
I merely followed the breadcrumb. Helena's gaze drifted toward the lake, now glimmering in the morning sun, serene and undisturbed. "It feels, lighter here," she said softly.
"As if the house itself can finally rest," Agatha nodded, allowing her eyes to roam over the hall. Despite the evidence of turmoil, the broken mirror, the signs of midnight dig, the lingering aura of fear, the estate no longer felt menacing. The past had been uncovered, the mystery solved, and a sense of equilibrium had returned. Guests and staff began to depart quietly, carrying their belongings and exchanging polite farewells. Bill Wong offered Agatha a cheeky grin and a tip of his hat before disappearing down the path toward the village. Mr. Hobbs lingered for a moment, tipping his cap in acknowledgement before tending once more to the gardens that had witnessed so many secrets. Agatha watched them go, then returned her gaze to Helena. "You've closed a chapter that began long before either of us arrived," she said, her voice reflective.
"Some ghosts are not the dead.
They are regrets, fears, and injustices left unresolved. Today those ghosts rest." Helena clasped the pendant against her heart, a small, serene smile breaking through. "Yes, today they rest. And tomorrow? Perhaps life will feel a little simpler." Agatha took a deep breath, the fresh morning air filling her lungs. She felt the subtle thrill of resolution mixed with calm satisfaction, a rare combination that left her smiling softly. The moors stretched endlessly before her, bathed in the gentle glow of dawn, carrying the promise of quiet days ahead and mysteries yet to discover elsewhere. With one last glance at the now peaceful hall, Agatha turned toward her car, boots crunching softly on the gravel. The sun climbed higher, light spreading across the moors, chasing away shadows and leaving only clarity, warmth, and a quiet sense of closure. Agatha settled into her favourite armchair by the bay window in her Carsley cottage, steam curling from a fresh pot of tea on the table beside her. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, scattering golden beams across the patterned rug, warming the room and lifting the remnants of the night's chill. Outside, the garden had begun to hum with life again. Birds darted between branches, and the first daffodils of spring swayed gently in the breeze. Mrs. Bloxby sat opposite her, a plate of biscuits balanced on her lap. Roy perched on the windowsill, legs dangling, looking as restless as ever. They leaned in expectantly, ready to devour every detail of Agatha's latest adventure. "Well?" Mrs. Bloxby asked, eyes twinkling. "Do tell. What horrors did you encounter this time, Mrs. Raisin?"
"Another ghost? Another cursed pendant?"
Agatha sipped her tea, savouring the warmth before setting the cup down. "Nothing quite so dramatic as cursed," she began, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But Plover Hall certainly has its peculiarities."
"And the more?"
She waved a hand vaguely toward the window, imagining the fog rolling over the hills. "It's alive in ways you wouldn't believe." Roy leaned forward, elbows on his knees.
"Alive, you say?"
"I can just picture it. Wind whistling through those empty corridors, flickering candles, a lady fainting at every shadow." He grinned.
"And I suppose you were the brave, fearless heroine, right?"
"Fearless, yes," Agatha replied with mock indignation.
"I fear no shadow. I simply—"
"Investigate them." She paused, letting a mischievous smile spread across her face. Though there was one rather unpleasant smell of cigar smoke and a
minor chest excavation at the lake. Mrs. Bloxby nearly dropped her biscuit. "A chest at the lake, my word!"
Was it filled with treasure? Gold, perhaps? "Treasure, in a manner of speaking," Agatha said, picking up the pendant and turning it in her hand. But more importantly, it contained truths long buried. Catherine Plover's story, finally uncovered, and the person behind the so-called haunting exposed. Roy whistled. "And all before breakfast, I imagine. You do like to keep busy, don't you?" Agatha chuckled, a genuine warm sound that seemed to fill the room. "Busy finds me, Roy. I thought I was retired from mysteries, but mysteries have a peculiar way of finding me instead." Mrs. Bloxby leaned back, eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, I suppose it keeps life interesting. Not that I envy you in the least, running around dark halls, listening to screams and reading old journals."
Agatha shook her head, smiling.
"It has its challenges. But there's a certain satisfaction in piecing together a puzzle, in righting wrongs, even long after the fact. And now Plover Hall's ghosts, both real and imagined, can finally rest." The three friends sat in companionable silence, sipping tea. The first rays of spring sun glinted through the window, catching the edges of the pendant, making it gleam like a tiny promise. Outside, the garden whispered of renewal, of new beginnings, and of mysteries that awaited on horizons yet unseen. Roy grinned once more, leaning back with exaggerated drama.
"So, Mrs. Raisin, when's the next adventure?"
"Or do we let you enjoy your retirement this time?"
Agatha laughed, the sound warm and light.
"Retirement, my dear Roy, is a fiction. As long as there's a mystery somewhere, and a curious mind to follow it, I'm afraid retirement simply doesn't suit me. Mrs. Blocksby chuckled, pouring another cup of tea. Then I suppose we'll keep our kettle warm for the next tale. Agatha raised her cup in agreement, smiling as the sunlight warmed her face. The world outside seemed bright, full of quiet promise, laughter, and the comfort of home, a perfect counterpoint to the dark corridors, misty lakes, and haunted secrets she had just left behind.